find your way. How do you? Are we okay? Okay. So the short answer is traditionally you can make a pilgrimage for anything you can pray for. Adoration, supplication, celebration, thanksgiving, penance, to name a few. And penance is something we always need, or some of us always need. So when we left, the church, some people in the church gave us 12 cards with prayers on them. And Ken and I would review them 3 times a day. Now, people say, why do you do this? Well, what happens is if you walk 6 to 8 hours a day, if you go for a walk on the bike path today, you'll start making lists about what you have to do the rest of the day. You'll inventory the tasks that to be done, or what you're going to get at the store when you get done with the walk. You walk 6 to 8 hours a day, 4 or 5 days in a row, you run out of things to make lists of. Okay. And so your mind begins to go places that you are surprised. And you meet people on the trail. I met a man who was an intense financial advisor in Amsterdam at mid-50s. His wife suddenly died, and he was adrift. And he was walking the Camino to figure out meaning for life. But you can't talk to a man like that for a while, walking with him, listening to him, without your own mind beginning to think about things. So if we go to the next slide. Next one. So this is the symbol of the Camino. And if you look at the shirt again, the shirt's such a good example. You can see the seashells. The seashells are a symbol of Santiago. There's a whole story about how it works out, but it's long and I don't believe it, so it doesn't matter. And you'll often see pilgrims wearing seashells. They used to carry them, it said, so they could use them to drink out of like a cup. The yellow one on the left is what you use. You'll see it all the way along, marking your route. Sometimes it's just sorted to a big yellow arrow, which you'll also see on the shirt. The shell in the middle is one that they use in the cities, and you see it on the ground. If you go to Paris and go to the Church of St. James in Paris, you will see these seashells in the ground marking the Camino path from Paris to there. The one on the right is a picture of the seashells in Poland, marking the path from there. You go to the next slide. There. This is in Ponferrada. This is a castle of the Knights Templar. And this was the first place we checked in. You carry a passport, a credential, and you have it stamped each day for different places that you stop, so you can establish how far you walked when you get to Santiago. And the booth where you check in was just below this. This is the castle, Knights Templar. It was established to protect pilgrims on the path. Next slide. So if you just click in the middle of it, it should just go. Okay. Next. We're going to go through these quick, so maybe. That's what you think. We're doing a pilgrimage. Well, when you talk about the Camino, one of the things that people will tell you is the Camino will decide the Camino that you walk. And you have to walk your own Camino. So this is a typical part of the Camino. You walk out through, this is the suburbs of Ponferrada. We're walking out, headed up. Next slide. This is a more rural village we're walking through. Very colorful, very pretty houses, very well maintained. Next slide. This is another example of the path walking up into the hillside. Next. This is a very typical scene that you'll see. This is partway up to Osabrera. Osabrera is, I'll get to another slide of it. It's the last great barrier between, on the road to Santiago. This is about 2/3 of the way up. There are 2 albergues on that hill. This is a church. There's an albergue, a dorm room where we slept adjacent to it. But you can see the pilgrim here, the art of the pilgrim, and he's got the shell on his head. That's how you know he's the pilgrim. Next slide. This is from the top of Osabrera. And this is Galicia. This is what it looks like. Rolling hills. The Camino is actually at the bottom of this, and it circles back up to where you see the White House on the left. Next slide. Another village we walk through, so it's just village after village. Next slide. So this is lunch. You may recognize Ken. So lunch, we usually a sandwich like this is a ham and cheese sandwich. It's prosciutto or something, but it's a different kind of ham than we would have. And one of the things you learned is you had to stoke the furnace. If you're walking 12 to 15 miles a day, you got to keep the energy up. And I didn't understand the guys doing the Tour de France, but they would bonk on the second day if they hadn't eaten well the previous day. You got to keep the furnace full, and you got to keep feeding it, or you'll have some trouble. Lunch is about $5 for a sandwich and a drink. Next slide. This is a typical, I'd call it a bar on the way. You usually eat breakfast here. That machine will slice and automatically slice and make the orange juice for you. In the evening, you can get drinks there, although you'd often see workmen coming in and getting a shot before going off to work. You usually had a tortilla, which was a potato, egg, and cheese pie in the morning for breakfast. Really delicious, put meat on your bones. Next slide. This shows a part of the Camino where people have been walking for hundreds of years, and you can see how it's worn down the earth in between. These are 4 Maltese nurses who I met on the trail and walked with for a while. So what happens is sometimes you walk by yourself. Sometimes you walk with people and talk with them. Sometimes you walk with people who don't talk with them. You meet all sorts of people. Because you're all walking at the same pace, you're not walking at the same pace, excuse me, you're going about the same distance every day. Every day for several days, you run into the same people. So you begin to have a relationship of sorts. So I met these nurses, and later on, we had an incident with a herd of cows coming up the road. But the head nurse, the one with the red hair there, was sharing with me that the previous day they gotten lost on the trail, and I was sort of chortling, yeah, I know what that experience is like. She says, "You're laughing at me? I curse you." I didn't think anything about it. So the next day I get up, I go down, and I'm coming out of a trail on the side, and I come up on a road, and it's not quite clear which way to go. So I go up the hill, and it's a pretty steep incline. I go up half, 3/4 of a mile. I get up to the top, and I realize I'm in the wrong place. So my choice is to go back down or to try and bushwhack across. Well, being me, I'm not going back down. There's nobody to ask directions, so I'm going to bushwhack. So I go out in the field. I can't see the other road. I know it's over there someplace. Of course, it's hedgerows, so everything's sunken. You wouldn't see the road. Come back out, get on the road, go up, and it drops off to the left. Well, I know I don't want to go that way, but there's a track off to the right. So I go off on the track on the right. And I'm walking, there's just this track. I come to where it crosses another track. There's no indication anybody's ever turned one way or the other on this thing. It's no clear. I just keep going, and then this mantra gets in my head: Pilgrim has not been penitent enough. Pilgrim has not been penitent. I swear by the end of it, I was being penitent for being so insensitive that I couldn't remember what I was supposed to be penitent for. So finally, after 45 minutes or an hour, I found myself going down a path into this farmyard. And I go back through the back of the farmyard. And as I come up, I can see the road where the Camino is above me. And I'm coming up, and who's standing right there? The Maltese nurse. And was it a curse? I don't know. So next slide. So this is the 100-kilometer marker, which is important for the reasons that we talk about. And all of a sudden, looking here in my magic book just changed on me. Okay, let's go to the next slide. This is, again, very typical path. Next slide. So that was Ken and I up to that point walking from from Ponferrada to Santiago. This is Saint Jean. It's a medieval city. If you get off the train there, you first show up in a 1930s, 40s kind of area. It's not very interesting, but then you step back 1 block and you've gone back probably 1,000 years. It's medieval. The streets are narrow, they're cobblestone. I mean, it's really exotic. It's just an amazing place. And it's a typical starting point for people who either do it the Camino in legs or do it all at once. Next slide. This is partway up the Pyrenees now. So when you leave Saint Jean, you go over the Pyrenees. There are 2 routes. One goes through a valley, one goes over the top. It's known as Napoleon's favorite route to invade Spain. It says something, you have a favorite route to invade another country, but I just share that observation. And it's stunning. This is a place that's partway up the mountain where I spent the night. And they have a delightful Camino dinner. Camino dinners are quite common on the Camino. And everybody stood up and introduced themselves and had the benefit for the rest of that trip. I had people to chat with. Next slide. Then again, this is on the very top. It's sort of flat on the top and very grassy, and the animals are allowed. It's like free range. So these horses are, I couldn't see any hobbles or anything. They just sort of stay in the same area. Next slide. There are large herds of sheep up there, and they're shepherds, and there are sheep dogs guiding them. Next slide. This is me and a group of my friends who I walked with for several days. You can tell this is dinner because I have sangria in front of me. And because you typically don't drink during the day. I mean, again, the effort to walk 15 to 18 miles a day, alcohol doesn't help. There's a bunch of Americans. A couple across are Canadians who had just retired and were going to take a year traveling around the world, and this was on their bucket list. Next slide. This is again what the Camino looks like, and you can see the different kinds of paths there are. Sometimes you're on roads, sometimes you're on gravel paths, sometimes you're on boardwalks, sometimes it'll be stone. Next. So this is the albergue in Pamplona. So you hear me use that term, but it's a dorm, and it's men and women all together. They have separate showers and whatnot. These are my buddies. That was coming back from an event, and so we're all kind of happy. And this was an old monastery that you can see it's got the dome ceiling, and they built the dorm on the inside of it. Now, if you think about it, how much do you pay for a hotel room if you go on vacation? $100, $150, maybe higher, depending how frugal you are. You pay $8 to $12 a night for an albergue. And when you do that, then supper, most places have what's called pilgrim's plate. And the pilgrim's plate is $12, and you get a salad or a pasta. You get a beef cutlet, chicken cutlet, or pork cutlet with some vegetables. You get a dessert, and you get a half bottle of wine. So for $25, you got the bulk of it taken care of. So you really get pretty frugal on there. Now, I told somebody earlier that 3 times I came to an albergue and I had it. You know, all they had left was top bunks, and I wasn't doing that. You know, I had a bad day. I want a pension. Money's no object. I want a pension, right? Big spender from the West. $35 later, I got my own room. I got my own shower. I got a TV in Spanish. Life is great. So this happened 3 times. Second time, same thing. Third time was in Roncasville. And all they had was a 4-star hotel, and they wanted $65. I mean, money's no object, but we're not going to be silly about this. So fortunately, the albergue in Roncasville was a brand new one. Next slide. So shortly before I left, my good friend Don Lewis passed. And in fact, he was such a good friend that I was afraid I was going to have to delay the trip. And I took his bulletin from his funeral with me, and I didn't know what I'd do with it I had it stamped different places, but I ultimately decided that I would walk 100 kilometers for him, in honor of him. It's very common for people to walk the Camino in honor of somebody. And so I made that commitment to myself. And the day before Pamplona, it had been bad. I can't tell you why it had been bad. As I think back, part of it was I didn't talk to as many people. It seemed more labored. But I'm also reminded that much of the distance walking is mental. Once you're fit enough to walk that distance, the mind has to be there. And if the mind isn't there, then it's a struggle. And so often you can walk much further, but it's really the mind that keeps you from doing it. I had pain in my knees, and that's where my buddies introduced me to isopropyl gel, which comes in a gel and you rub it right on your knees, and it's instant. It's amazing. It wasn't available here when I started. So I had that problem. It was supposed to rain the next day. You hear my excuses building? I was supposed to meet my daughter in Barcelona in a couple of days because she was at a conference there. That was the plan. And I was going to have to walk out from Pamplona a day and a bit and then get back to Pamplona to take the train. And I could just stay there and enjoy Pamplona. Why didn't I do that? And besides, nobody knew I had made this commitment. So on the right is the dinner we had that night. And that's a tapas dinner, and it probably cost me, I don't know, $15 with the drinks. We shared the meal, and I shared the story of Don. And one of the things about Don is, if you've ever been in church and had the pastor say the service is running long, we're only going to sing verses 1, 3, and 5 to shorten things up. Don would stand up right there in church in front of everybody and say to the pastor, "You have to sing all the verses." So yeah, he did it to Charlie. So I'm sitting there telling this story, and I'm hearing him say, "You have to sing all the verses," and I'm thinking of copping out on the last 20 kilometers. So I decided I had to do it. I had to finish it. And the next morning I got up, and it was a beautiful day. And I saw my friends. There's a Catalonian separatist. I mean, you know about Catalonia, is that part of Spain. And he supported the separatist movement to separate Catalonia from Spain, but he was living in France, I think, because politically he couldn't live in Spain, and he was walking through Spain now. And he and I would greet each other with good morning. He loved Good Morning Vietnam, and we would greet each other with a large bellow, "Good morning, Santiago." So we'd meet each other in a square someplace, and all these people are sitting around, and we'd holler this across. We had hugs and kisses. It's just a wonderful experience with him. Strange. I mean, he's a neat guy, very different. Anyway, next slide. So this next slide is the path coming out of Pamplona, and you'll notice that the people are walking towards you. One of the things about the Camino is everybody's walking in the same direction. If you go to the bike path, you'll see people walking every which way. But on the Camino, everybody is walking in the same direction. And if you sit in a cafe, you'll see people all walking by you going in the same direction. You might see a local going the other way. Next slide. Another view, people coming up. Next slide. This is on a hill. This is a very famous piece of art. Again, pilgrim art on the above Pamplona, which is in the background. So on the last day of trying to walk the 100 kilometers, I stayed at a place, and then the following morning I had to get up and walk an hour and a half, 2 hours. So you've been walking 6 to 8 hours several days in a row. Hour and a half, 2 hours is nothing. And I'm walking along, and all those self-doubts came back to me. You know, I'm just doing a head game on myself. Nobody cares. It really doesn't make any difference. Why am I doing this to myself? Now I got to figure out how to get back to wherever. Yada 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 yada. And the next slide. I came around the corner, and this is what I saw. And this, it's more dramatic actually in person, but it's the city on the hill. And for Christians, that means it's Jerusalem. It's my goal. And you can see the pilgrims walking up to it. And I went through the gate into the small square, and this euphoria came over me. This is true. I don't know how to describe it any other way. And all the people I've been walking with for the last week came through. The Irish realtors, the Canadian, retired Canadians. I didn't see that the Maltese nurses weren't on this part. But there were just all of these people that I knew and had been with, and there were hugs, and it was really an amazing. And I could almost feel Don with me there when I did it, and I had not expected that. Next slide. Example of a meal. I don't know if you've all seen the Portuguese way, the struggle to survive, but you'll see. Next slide. This is in the Rojas part of Spain. There's a winery that actually has an open spigot. Okay, so you can, they're all strange kind of rules about how much wine they can sell. So they have extra wine, I think, as part of it. But also, how much wine can you drink if you're trying to walk, when it's hard. Next slide. So this is what's called the Meseta. It's a high dry plains, and it's about the middle third of the Camino. And a lot of people hate this part because it's relatively flat, and the terrain doesn't vary a lot. Next slide. Some more of it. I thought it was magnificent. It's big sky country. It's open. It really is stunning in its own way. Next slide. This is the Donativo. It looks nicer than it is. This is you sleep on the floor on mats. You only pay what you thought it was worth. They had really great showers and bathrooms, which is what you care about. Because once you're asleep, you don't really care what's going on around you unless they're snoring. On the right, they take the money that they've gotten from donations the night before, and they use that to buy the food for the next night meal, and we have a communal meal. These two, I think they were Spaniards. I'm not sure. They might have been Italian. There's this huge paella, and you can see how big that pan is. It's not very deep over an open pit outside. Just a wonderful experience. Next slide. This is my friend Jose. Well, I walked with him for quite a while. He kept trying to teach me Spanish. He didn't speak English, and I don't speak Spanish except for a few words. So he spoke a little English. He probably spoke more English than I speak Spanish. But we talked. I mean, it was really quite a delightful part of the trip for me. And he kept insisting I carry my backpack, which was strange because I'm not that old. I thought he was older than me, but probably not. Next slide. So one of the places I stayed was a nunnery for the nuns of St. Clair, and they're a cloistered group. And I was told that they're a cloistered group. And so if you go to Vespers, you go into this old church, and this is called a monstrate in the Catholic tradition, and it has spotlights on it, and you sit here looking at it, and the nuns are behind you chanting Vespers. And it is one of the most dramatic experiences on the Camino. It's just hard not to be moved. Next slide. There are any number of small churches. I think a lot of the little lady, the church ladies all over the world are always trying to keep the place going, and they have a little rubber stamp on the stump for your credential, and they're hoping people will leave a euro when you do that, and everybody does, and they make a lot of money for that local church that otherwise doesn't have much income. But the cathedrals are magnificent. There's this one in Burgos, there's one in Leon, and there's one in Santiago. And there are some amazing churches and others. Next slide. This is the tower in the Burgos Cathedral, and you can see the colors and the natural light coming down through it. It's just amazing. Next slide. So these are people you meet on the trail. This is one guy. So people do cycling. People do it on horseback. You see a lot of cyclists, although they typically do a different route because for some reason they don't like to do steps and they don't like to do riverbeds. You know how cyclists can be. So, but they do in Burros. Now this little girl over here. So you have this sense of, you get kind of proud of yourself in a way that you're actually making it, and then you get a little arrogant, and you see a little girl like this and say, well, I won't see her again. Well, I kept seeing her day after day. What's the deal? Well, the first thing is she's got a tiara, The second thing is she's so adorable that as you're walking along, I know people were picking her up, putting her on their shoulders and carrying her halfway, right? And with her, that sounds right. But there are two books. One is called "I'll Push You," in which a fellow does the whole Camino with his friend who is confined to a wheelchair. He's got something like ALS. He's got neurological disease. And so when you come to steps and when you come to like a half mile of really rough road, what happens? Other pilgrims just pick him up and carry him. I mean, nobody asked. It just happened. It's amazing. There's a movie called documentary. I'm a big hefty guy. I'm doing this trail, boy, and I'm macho here. There's a woman with a little kid in a baby carriage. Same thing. When she comes to the steps, people just grab it, carry it over. It's amazing to see. So the next slide, please. This is called the Cross of Iron, Cruz de Ferro, and it's interesting. All the other stops have been arranged by the Catholic Church, which is appropriate because it's the Catholic thing. This one was created by pilgrims. And so the tradition is you bring a rock and you leave it there. And they actually have a crew that has to clear debris away from it because people leave stuff other than rocks, and they got 300,000, 400,000 people a year doing this. And if everybody leaves a rock, pretty soon it builds up. So they do clear it away. But the next slide. I took a slide from my church that included a lot of different, and a lot of people in the community, and left that there. So there's a piece, and the idea is that you leave behind, something you're carrying emotionally. And again, even if you're not of the faith or you're not a faithful person, just the thought of that, and now you're going to walk 6 to 8 hours, or even you're walking 6 to 8 hours before you get there, you begin to think about that sort of thing. What kind of things do you need to leave behind? So it's hard not for it to be spiritual at some point. Next slide. This is another, I mean, I don't even know which one it is, but it goes through so many of these places. Does that look familiar, Scott? Is it? Right. They're not the same, but it's hard to pick them out, but they're just exquisite. Next slide. This is what we call the credential, and you can see, I don't remember which one this is, but it's this is from my first trip. You can see you get it stamped by different people. You can see the seashell, you can see different religious things. Some of them, like the one that says Campo, is probably a bar of some sort. A bar has a different meaning there, although sometimes it has the same meaning. But anyway, so you can see you get that. And when you get down to the end, you get the certificate, which I don't know if that's made it around over there. Has everybody seen my credential? No, you got stalled, Gary. Start walking, Gary. Next slide. So I'm coming to the end here, but this is, for me, this is sort of the Camino in a capsule. And I think I have it right. The guy on the lower right is a Spaniard. The person next to him is a German. The woman next to him is Canadian. There's me. The person across on my left is an Italian. The next one's a Brazilian, and the woman is a Belgian. I mean, that's the kind of community you meet there. And it's a community in a cylinder, is what I describe it. On the third day of our trip, Ken developed foot problem. And so what you do when that happens is you either stop, or in our case, we sent him ahead. And then he'd rest to help his foot. So we did that. And the next day I'm walking and I'm up at Osabrera, and somebody comes up to me and says, I'm sorry to hear about your friend. Word had passed along the Camino that he had gotten hurt. So you really become a community. Next slide. So in the cathedral in Santiago, they have a pilgrim's mass. And they have this thing that's called I got to get the name right, Bota Fumero. It's 5 feet tall. So picture this thing, it's this tall. And it's as big as my body. And they stuff it with stuff, and it billows smoke. And these 5 guys come out, or 7 guys come out, and they hoist, they're wearing monk robes, and they pull on these ropes and they hoist it up, and they start it swinging, and then they pull on the rope to get it swinging up over the congregation. And in the next slide, you'll see them, they'll be in the lower left-hand corner, you can just see them. If you'll hit the, can you hit play there? I don't know if yours, this should work, but maybe it won't. I think if you click in the middle of it, it will. If you got your arrow, if you just put your arrow in the middle of it, it should. There we go, it's working. So you see the, you'll see the guys, see, you can see it going, you look and see the guy just standing up, look how he's just standing up there. Now I had to turn it sideways, so you can see this thing swing over. Incense, yeah. So one of the things you think about, how am I doing on time? I've gone over probably.
That's okay, go ahead.
Another minute. So one of the things that after each of these things, I would have names of people and I would say prayers for, I'd develop a prayer for them and I'd send them the prayer. And my prayer for them and for most people now is, may you always feel the presence of God's grace. May it enfold you, comfort, and uphold you. May you always be aware that you are not alone, and that you know that you have family and friends who care and pray for you. So that's sort of what I have taken from the Camino. So I have time for a few questions. If okay, questions? Yes.
It's just above the border into Portugal.
Yes.
And I was in Portugal 5 years ago, and I was so surprised that the Portuguese language was more like German than it was like Spanish. Did you encounter any of that, like a localized combination of the two?
No, my Spanish isn't good enough, and most people spoke English. When I will tell you that I did a tour and we were in Porto, and I saw the yellow arrows, and that was part of what inspired me to do, because one of the places you can start is in Porto, and it was like, oh, I gotta go, and so I eventually did. But the language is, you speak so many languages on the Camino that you don't always interact very much with the locals, but you interact with all the people on the Camino. Other questions? Yes.
Your backpack, it was invisible?
So the backpack weighed 22 pounds, which is lighter than some, heavier than others. But I'll tell you a secret. After the third day, somebody explained to me that for $5, there's a taxi service that will take it to your next place. So what you have to figure out is where you're going to be. So that puts a limit on it. Now, I don't want to say I'm a big spender, but $5, I only spent 12 on a room. So you used it as well, right?
My wife did it. Yeah.
Did you carry your own?
I did.
Oh, see? And how heavy was your pack?
About 30 pounds.
Yeah.
Too heavy.
Yeah. Well, you noticed in the guidebooks that I passed around that the pages are torn out, and that's because you to save weight, I would only take the pages that I was going to use that trip. I'd staple them together and then I'd bring them back. Yeah.
So one of the books that I read was about a woman who did the Camino. She started out with a friend, ended up by herself. She took one change of clothing.
Yes.
Which impressed the daylights out of me, because I can't imagine doing that. But everything I've read says 10 to 15% of body weight is what we should carry.
Something, well, you do have the $5 option. I carried, so I used the high-tech hiking clothes. I mean, t-shirts, you wear multiple layers. So I'd have a t-shirt, I'd had a wind shirt that, and then I carried a vest and a rain jacket. And so between that, I had enough pants, and all my stuff was quick dry stuff. And I had pants with zip off, and then I had shoes. Shoes you have to be very careful about shoes because you don't want to get blisters. So, and I heard so many of the books will have stories about people's shoes failing after 300 miles. And I figured out that it was all the walking I was doing. By the time I left, I was walking 12 to 15 miles 5 times a week. But I would have used up the shoes, so I got another pair of shoes. But I also carried 4 pairs of socks, and I would, you walk for 2 hours, you take a break, have a coffee, something, walk for 2 hours, break for lunch. And I would usually take my shoes off during the breaks, and I would change my socks at halfway through. Did you follow something?
Yeah, we wash our clothes every night. This is a little bag called a scrub, which made it pretty
Hey.
easy. And everybody was doing that. And just, I'm not out to provide me running this time.
Yeah.
They really only wind up going through 1 or 2 pairs of changes.
Yeah, Ken and I started, we would do laundry every 4th or 5th day. So that was the, and
We
you,
have time for one more question.
okay, questions? Any other, last question?
How long did it take you to hold?
I figure about 40 days.
Oh, that's a very good pilgrimage number.
Yeah. All right.
Tony, thank you very much. I think this was great. Made me wish that I had the energy and stamina to start the same thing. In gratitude for your having given us this presentation, we will be making a donation in your name to the Williston Central School Mentoring Program. Thank you very much.
Great speaker, Charlie. Thank you. I'm really inspired. And I know that some of the people that are at home at least mentioned to me that they're going to start the El Camino this fall. Can you raise your hand if you're on the screen? Doing the Camino?
Not all at once.
Well, anyway, buen Camino. I hope it's a great experience for you. We're actually going to start in August and do our first, we hope, 100 miles. So we'll keep you posted. So for those of you at home, we now go into announcements and some sharing time. So you're welcome to stay, but if you need to go, we understand that as well. And again, thank you for joining us. And please feel free to reach out again because we'd love to have you come in person or by Zoom again.